Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today's a Q&A episode. I have three questions I want to dive into. Before I go into that though, I hope everybody had a great holiday week. By the time this comes out, I believe this will be the 30th. So New Year is right around the corner. So I hope you guys are feeling good heading into the year with that. I always think it's a good time to reflect on the year in terms of what went well, what could I do better, what did I accomplish, and then set some goals for 2025. And I just find that a lot of people poo on the idea of New Year's goals, but I do think it's good to have this time where it's okay, this is a cutoff, and then you can reflect and break things up and reflect there, and then obviously set some new goals and things to focus on. Hope you had great holidays, and then you get ready for this upcoming year. But with that out of the way, let's dive into the Q&A. So first question I have is, how often would you say we should go into a different phase of our training, such as strength, hypertrophy, increasing, decreasing frequency, rest periods, temporary changes, etc.? So I think this is a great question, right? Because I think people think they need to drastically change their training up regularly, and that's not really the case, right? So you really don't need to change things up. Like if our goal, so again, it is very dependent on our goal. Okay, so we're going to take this from a muscle growth, body composition standpoint, right? So that's when I hear training and you ask me that's what we're talking about specifically, right? So if you're someone who's you have some sort of other goal, whether it's related to power and strength or endurance, or again, whatever type of goal you have, this may change slightly, right? In terms of how you go about that. But again, if we're looking at weightlifting and we're trying to build muscle again for body comp purposes, to me, you really don't need to change things up very often, and you don't have to change things up, right? You don't have to increase frequency. You don't have to decrease rest periods. You don't have to go through certain phases like, hey, you need to do a strength phase. Hey, you need to do a specific hypertrophy phase, right? Because again, most of our training needs to, if we're trying to build muscle, most of our training needs to be towards that, right? That's going to be what we're focused on there with that, right? So again, I think that's the first thing is we don't necessarily have to do that. Now, there's some factors that will go into it, and we'll talk about it in terms of what could potentially warrant us to change things up. But if you could stick with something and you're feeling good, like you can really stick that out as long as you want. You're not like, your body's not all of a sudden going to be like, hey, you didn't change things up or progressing and everything like that. You have to change things up. So I think that's the first thing there. The big thing that we would change over time for really trying to change our physique is going to be, hey, maybe we need to dip into some periods of time in a caloric deficit. Maybe we need to dip into sometimes into a caloric surplus, but that's going to be mostly nutrition related there if we're thinking long term here. But again, our muscles aren't very smart. They just know that, hey, this is tougher. I need to add more muscle, right? So that's ultimately what we have to do there. And that's not like anything is going to alter that. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can go about building muscles. Again, we can utilize that if we want to, but if you find something works for you and you're progressing, you feel good, you're seeing the change you want, just understand that you don't have to change it. You're not going to essentially be missing out on anything. I guess potentially you could be like, you could find a method that you enjoy more that's going to allow you to push it more. You may find something that your body responds better to if you've only done the same thing. So there is other we want to consider. But in saying that, I typically have clients stay in a training cycle for about 5 to 8 weeks. Now, in saying that, this doesn't mean that after that 8 weeks is up, we just completely change what we're doing, right? We'll do 5 to 8 weeks, depending on how they're feeling. We may just do a reset week where we bring numbers back a little bit, and then you reset and you start back over. I may change a few exercises. I may not, depending on how it's going based on your feedback. But again, we'll spend about 5 to 8 weeks in one training cycle, and then we'll probably dial back intensity and then go into a new cycle where maybe we change up some of these things that we talked about. So again, I'll talk about what that looks like. This is also dependent on the fact that, hey, how adherent are you? If you're 100% adherent, then I think you're going to fall closer to this 5 to 8 weeks. If you're not very adherent, it doesn't really matter because, again, you're not training regularly to where you're probably not getting that fatigue that could potentially build up there. But I would say on average, 5 to 8 weeks typically. Now, this is going to be changed based on things like recovery. So how you're recovering and life events. So it's if there's a period of time that's going to lead you to not be as recovered because you have something going on, again, that could factor into it. Or again, like sleep's worse, whatever it may be, or you just really pushed it for those 5 to 8 weeks. And now you're starting to see fatigue build up. Also, one thing I want to say on this too, is just because I say 5 to 8 weeks doesn't mean that if you go 9 weeks, that's like, it could go longer than that. And again, it's based on these things, right? Also how you're progressing and motivation. How are you feeling towards this phase? Again, we also have to take into consideration, like, okay, do you also need to be okay with not necessarily being the most motivated? So that's something that we would consider as well too, where it's just like, oh, hey, I wasn't motivated motivated to train today. I'm just going to change everything up. It's a little bit more than that. But again, those are going to be things that we're looking into. And this goes into recovery, but are there certain exercises that maybe aren't feeling great for you? And then from there, it's okay. Hey, somebody gets to week 7 and maybe they're starting to feel like things are slowing down. They're getting a little less motivated to train. This has been happening for a couple weeks. And then they have something going on next week that, hey, may alter their recovery. Hey, maybe it's time for us to a little bit. So that's how we'll go about it. And like I said, 5 to 8 weeks is most typical, but it could go longer than that. I typically try not to keep people in it for less than 5 weeks unless there's some sort of injury or big like thing that kind of popped up that we weren't talking about. And so now if we go into specifics in terms of do we need to do strength, more strength-based stuff, more hypertrophy, increasing, decreasing frequency, you could do more like strength focus. Like you could have a phase that's a little bit more strength focused, but you don't have to do that, especially if you're just trying to train again for building muscle. But also I think we don't necessarily need to do a phase where it's just strength work. Like you don't have to do that. You could do something where, okay, maybe if we look at our entire training program as a whole, 75% of it is in the 6 to 10 rep range. Then maybe you have in the next phase, 50% of it is in the 6 to 10. Then you have 25% in like the 8 to 12 or 10 to 12 or 10 to 15, and then 25% in like the 1 to 5. Again, I typically wouldn't do that. I would say most of the time, I would say close to 75% of our training is going to be in that 6 to 12 rep range. And then if not more, and then we might hop outside of that. So I think that's other things you don't necessarily have to have. Like I think people think, oh, this phase I'm going to do just high reps on everything. I don't think you need to do it that way. You can have a blend where, okay, maybe we're biasing a little bit more higher reps, but we never just fully do like high reps or something along those lines, right? But also on top of this, again, if you want to just build muscle, and that's the main thing, you could literally spend 100% of your training 100% of the time doing 6 to 12 reps, resting for 2 minutes, and keeping frequency the same. Now, again, we can manipulate this to where if you're getting bored with that setup, you've been doing that for years on end, you want to maybe see if something else works. Well, again, we could try to, if there's a certain muscle group you want to train 3 times a week, we could bump it up to 3 times a week. If you're finding that you can't train 5 days a week, you need to drop it down to 4, then we do that. But there isn't going to be any magic to doing that other than that could change up the variables within it and you find a better setup for you. Or again, you just haven't, maybe you've always trained in the 6 to 12 rep range and maybe your body responds pretty well to 12 to 15 on some stuff. And so we give that a shot. So that's typically how I will go about that. We know we can build muscle so long as we're in a wide rep range from 5 to 30 reps, so long as we're taking that target muscle fairly close to failure. So again, we can utilize that. We can use that in multiple different ways. We can use that in the sense that, hey, we could just stay in that 6 to 12 rep range, or we can switch it up a little bit. But from my understanding in the research, there isn't anything that shows that, hey, you have to do all the different rep ranges. Now, there are probably going to be some small, some different adaptations that are small if you do, say, 12 to 15 versus 6 to 10, but it isn't going to be anything drastic to where it's like you have to do that. I think generally speaking, if we're trying to look at everything as a whole, I think doing this weight training is going to get you, obviously it's going to help you build muscle. You're still going to build some strength. Now, obviously, if you're trying to build max strength, you probably don't want to be doing a lot in say the 12 to 15 plus rep range with that. If you spend a lot of time in the 6 to 10 rep range, you are going to get strong in combination with that. If we can spend a lot of our time in that 6 to 12 rep range, then we check that off where it's like, hey, you're getting strength, you're also building some muscle, right? So those adaptations are good to go. And then really from there, it's okay, maybe we just need to do a little bit more like dedicated cardio because that is going to be a slightly different adaptation with that. If body comp is your main goal, there really is no need to have to change things up or drastically change what you're doing. And like I said, I would never have just one phase be like one thing. Again, it may be the priority, but and make up a bit more of the training, but we're never just like, again, if we're trying to build muscle and that's like our main goal, we're never just, I'm not going to do like hypertrophy style training. Again, this is goal dependent though. If you're trying to develop max strength, then, and that's your main goal, then things would change. Again, this is goal dependent, but from that standpoint, there's never a downside to slightly switching things up, but you also don't necessarily have to. And again, I may throw in things like some rest pause sets, myo rep sets. Again, that can get a slightly different stimulus than just that 6 to 10 rep range there with that. So hopefully that gives you more insight into that. Let me know if you have any follow-ups on that. All right, so I got another question, female athlete triad. So if you're not familiar with that, basically female athlete triad, RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome. Basically, these are just symptoms of a combination of being too lean, not consuming enough calories for like daily activities there. And so what recommendations do you have for reversing without excess body fat gain? I've been in this position for about 1.5 years. I know I need to reduce my cardio and add in food, but I just don't know how quickly to do so as I am very lean and have been this way for about 1 year now and need to restore my hormones. Yeah, I think this is a great question here. So I want us to dive into what can we do to make sure you're in a good spot here. So I think the first thing is you have to understand that part of the reason you're in this is because you are so lean. And so some body fat gain is going to happen. You're going to need this. That's what a lot of people don't understand is let's take like the extreme, somebody who's like doing a bodybuilding competition. Yes, it's really hard to get that lean, but then also people can't stay there for extended periods of time. You feel like crap, your libido's low, you just don't feel good. Hunger's high, mentally you can't really think, you're super tired, like you don't want to do anything. And again, that's a sign your body's like uncomfortable with where it's at. There's some people that can maintain being a little bit leaner with more ease than other people. And so there's a lot of variability within this. But at the end of the day, just generally speaking, the leaner you get, the tougher it's going to be to maintain that. And if you're in this spot and you are very lean, but you're also scared to gain body fat, you are in a tough position, but you do have to understand that you are going to have to gain some body fat. Now, when somebody hears that, they automatically think that they're going to like puff up and be overweight. And that's not going to happen. But again, you just have to understand that if your hormones are out of whack, you're not feeling great, but you're like staying lean for whatever reason, just understand that you're what's more important to you, your overall health or like vanity metric at that point. And you might just be someone who unfortunately you just can't stay that lean that you currently are. And again, that's something that you're going to have to figure out. But I think the first thing is just accepting that the main reason you're in this position is because of the body fat levels. Yes, maybe your activity levels and your current caloric intake, and they all go hand in hand, right? Because to maintain your current leanness, you have to be at a certain calorie amount. And then if you're also expending a certain amount of energy, that obviously you need that. I think the big takeaway here is you're going to have to gain some body fat, and you have to be okay with that because that's the main reason why you're at where you're at there with that. But I know you asked, okay, how can I reverse without gaining excess as body fat? But so I think this person understands that they need to do that. But I also think that maybe not fully, right? So next, the next things we're going to do is there's really no benefit of you slowly increasing your calories versus just going to your maintenance. So if you have an idea of what your maintenance is, I would go there. I would just get to your maintenance because there's not going to be like really, if you just slowly increase your calories, you're just going to prolong this period of time that you're in this relative energy deficiency syndrome or like female athlete, like triad, right? So you're better off just going to your maintenance if you have an idea of what that is, especially if you're here. The only time I would tell somebody that, hey, we can slowly reverse your calories back up is if they do have those higher body fat levels and they don't have these extreme kind of, but this biofeedback that this person is having, right? With their hormones and everything like that. And so to go off that next is understand that just because your weight goes up a bit initially doesn't mean you overshot. I see too many people end up being in this state, this low calorie state and getting stuck there because they worry about their weight coming up at all. And they end up increasing their calories for a little bit, see their weight come up slightly from glycogen increase, just more food in your system. Maybe again, anytime you increase carbohydrates, you're going to see water weight come up a little bit. That's not a bad thing. And because of that, then people are like, my weight came up. Now I got to go back to what I was doing before, have it come back down, then I'll go back up. And they just end up going back and forth and they never can actually get to their maintenance calories because they're scared of seeing their weight come up a little bit. You need to understand that because that's going to help you get to where you actually need to go in this state. From there, outside of, hey, those initial kind of increases in food intake and seeing your water weight kind of fluctuate, you'll start to stabilize. Just again, if you're not okay with that, just understand that you're going to end up being at a lower caloric intake than what you need, and you may end up just continuing to be in this state here for extended periods of time. Next thing we want to do after we see that weight stabilize a bit is the slow rate of gain. And what are we talking about? Maybe 1%, 1 to 2% of body weight gain per month on that. And so again, finding whatever caloric intake that is for you. So if this was me in the situation, I'd get you to your maintenance calories. Again, if you haven't estimated it, that's what I would do. Maybe start on the lower end and then slowly work your way back up. But don't increase your calories by 50 a day or 50 a week. Get to your maintenance, start on the low end, and then you can start to slowly taper up your caloric intake. But from there, then what I'm doing is I'm looking for a slow rate of gain. We're not looking at day-to-day weight trends. We're looking at weekly trends, week over week, month over month. Where's that at? And again, we want that to be anywhere from 1 to 2% of body weight gain per month on that. Okay. And that's going to ensure that we're going to limit fat gain in that process. Like I said, in this situation, you're going to need some fat gain. You're going to need to add some body fat to your frame. But again, the key here is to minimize extra body fat gain. Keep protein up. If you keep your protein up, you're going to be in a good spot there. Protein, if you're going to overshoot a macro, protein's going to be the one that you want to do that with. And again, this also helps ensure that you're getting a good base of like whole foods throughout the day. And it can help you limit over consuming other macros, which again, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that because you at this point need to gain some body fat anyways. Keep lifting. If we can keep lifting in this process and keep our protein up and keep that slow rate of gain, any weight you do gain is probably going to be a little bit more muscle than fat anyways. Now, in saying this, when we are super lean, you're probably going to gain a little bit more body fat to where until your body starts to feel comfortable. But if you are lifting in a smart way and not just overdoing it to burn more calories, and again, you're lifting to build muscle, you should be in a good spot here, especially once you get to a comfortable level for your body. If we lift, keep protein up, keep that slow rate of gain, your body's going to it's going to preferentially add muscle over. And we also want to get good sleep, right? I think that's going to be super important for you in this process, because that's going to help restore your hormones because you're sleeping well, you're recovering, but also it's going to ensure that you're not gaining a bunch of body fat in that process. And you're just going to feel better overall. So we want to make sure we get sleep down as well in this process. My last kind of tip here is going to be careful with really low days and really high days. What I mean by that is be careful with having days where you're really low from a caloric intake standpoint, and then you're really high, and then you're really high. So now you bring it down the next day, and then it's this vicious cycle. Try to keep it within a not tight window, but within a range where, hey, you're not going too high, but you're also not going too low. We're keeping that delta somewhere within a range there. What that looks like, it just depends on the person with that. So it's hard to give you exact numbers. I would say 250 to 500 calorie kind of delta is where I would keep it there, because if we go the opposite where we have these really low days where we're spending more time in a deficit, again, that's not going to be good for all the things you mentioned. Then you have really high days from a body comp standpoint, you're probably really minimizing the amount of muscle you're going to gain in that process there. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions on this. So last question of the day is, sorry, let me pull this up real quick. And I got this on Spotify. So if you ask me a question on Spotify, for some reason, it's like really hard to, I don't know why. I'm just not, I guess I'm not logged in. Maybe it's something on my end, but like they don't pop up for me anywhere. So I was just looking through this and I saw I had a question. So if you ask me questions before on Spotify, I apologize. I need to go through and see if there's any on here, but I did happen to see this one. So is there a difference in rate of fat loss doing carb/fat cycling where calories stay the same and you just manipulate macros versus calorie cycling where calories will change day to day throughout the week? So it's a good question. So carb fat cycling. So essentially what that is, it sounds like the way this person asked it is, in this scenario, calories are going to stay even throughout the week. The only thing you're manipulating is, hey, maybe some days you're going higher fat, lower carb, lower fat. And then in the other situation, you're cycling your calories. Now, obviously, when we cycle our calories, we're also manipulating macros in that process, right? So obviously, if you have one day where you're at 200 calories and then you have another day where you're at 2,500, 1,500, those calories have to go from somewhere, right? And they're typically going to come from carbs or fats. Essentially, what this person is asking is they're doing an approach where they're manipulating their macros, but keeping calories the same. And then the other one, they're manipulating their calories, which in turn is going to manipulate your macros. You can't manipulate your calories and not manipulate your macros in that process, right? And so they're asking from a fat loss perspective, would that first approach of just manipulating macros be better from a fat loss perspective? And so I think calories are going to be what's going to determine your weight change over weeks. Like it's going to tell your body like, hey, we need to break things down or we need to build things up or keep them the same. And so calorie balance is going to have that impact there. So in the long term and in terms of actual fat loss over time, your calorie balance is going to be the biggest thing. Again, we need to keep that in mind. In the short term, changing macros can manipulate water weight and it can help with performance, right? So for example, if we have a day where we go high carb, you may hold on to a little bit more water weight the next day, again, just because carbohydrates have water, they draw water into your, so there's glycogen, there's that, and we're obviously going to increase our water weight when we have some carbohydrates. If you have a high carb day and then you go low carb, you're going to see that decrease in like water weight. So I think in the short term, you can manipulate your weight with that, right? But in the long term, from not controlling those calories and we're not adjusting the caloric intake, won't really matter there with that. Long story short, I don't think there's going to be, again, if we're not manipulating your calories, there's not going to be any extra fat loss benefit from a carb, from cycling carbs and fats if we're not manipulating our calories there. Now, in saying that, I do think that there could be some slight body comp benefits of if you manipulate your calories in the process, right, and you get into a deficit. I think there could be some benefits of maybe changing your cycling your macros based on your activity levels for the day, right? But again, there's not going to be any special benefit of just cycling your carbs and fats if we're not taking into consideration the calorie balance on there. But like I said, I think there's some benefits. Okay, on days that you have, maybe you need better performance, you have more activity. Again, you like carb cycling could be something that you potentially do there with that, but it's not going to provide any extra fat loss benefit there without the manipulating the calories with that. So hopefully that answered. I thought that was a great question. So that's it for this week. If you found this podcast to be helpful, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Next, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff H. That's where I'm most active on social media. media. So if you have any questions on this or any questions in general, add me on there, shoot me a message. More than happy to help you out. And then lastly, if you are somebody who needs to you want to limit fat gain while gaining some weight, or maybe you want to figure out how to manipulate your training or manipulate carb cycling, calorie cycling to improve your body comp, then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We can dive into your goals, come up with a game plan for you moving forward. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. I'll chat with you guys next time.